Chris Adams here, and I'm in the mud hole basement, and I want to do a quick instructional on how to put the MHX push pole together. Now, this is a 21 footer, and it is carbon fiber. It's a 3K twill, and it weighs just over 4 pounds assembled. So really, this is a super high-end carbon fiber push pole, and this is something that I use a lot. So when you get this in a box, they're gonna come in 7-foot sections, okay? So what that is that really allows for a little bit, inexpensive shipping compared to trying to ship a 21-foot pole. So when assembled, this is a 21 footer. So you're gonna get 3 separate 7-foot sections. You're gonna get the point, which also comes with a stainless steel tip, and it's actually pretty sharp, so be careful. You're also gonna get the fork end. So to put it together, you're gonna receive two 12-inch ferrules, and we've got the pole marked as you go through this, and it's gonna be marked on this end here with a fork. And the reason that this is the fork end is because there is an extra layer of the 3K twill laid onto the last 2 feet of this section. And then on the very other section, there is also another 2-foot layer laid on top of this. And what that does is it's a little bit extra protection against oyster bars and limestone rock, things like that that we encounter out on the flats. So when you see the sections that have that last 2 foot of extra twill on it, that is gonna be for your tip, and that's also gonna be for your fork. Then the other ends are labeled ferrule. So you'll see here, the sticker is labeled ferrule, and that is going to be where you're going to add in the ferrule and then connect the rest of the pole in. So when you unbox this, we do recommend to go through and do a little checklist. You're gonna get a set of directions. It's front and back, very easy to read, and it's got everything you're gonna need in it. So I just go through, you're gonna get a roll of sandpaper, you're gonna get gloves, you're gonna get the Pro Paste, mixing cups and sticks. So as we go through this, I lay everything out, I double check the ferrule ends. Your center section is gonna be labeled with the screen print of the MHX push pole on it. So this you're gonna know is your center section, and that is also marked ferrule and ferrule, because that's where you're actually gonna put ferrules and glue it in to the end sections. So when I refer to the end sections, I mean the 2 sections that have a tip and a fork, and then the middle section is the one that's screen printed, and that's pretty easy to notice. So what we're gonna do is I get everything set up, and you're gonna take this 12-inch section here, this is your ferrule, and I'm going to measure it out and mark a white mark here with a China marker. You can mark it with a Sharpie, you can mark it with a piece of tape, really anything that you're gonna know that is exactly 6 inches, which is half of the length of this ferrule. So what we're gonna do, we'll pull the Pro Paste out. Do not mix all of the Pro Paste at one time. That's a 4 ounce worth of Pro Paste. It's plenty to do this entire pole. Just mix maybe, a quarter at a time. And what that's gonna do is mix it in small batches, work through it, and then clean each section as you do it. So before you glue this, start gluing this pole together, just like anything that's carbon fiber that's in a tube form, this is wrapped over a mandrel. So keep in mind that there is a release agent on the inside of these poles. It's just like with anything else, so that they can get it off of that steel mandrel. What you're gonna wanna do is, that's why we provide you with the sandpaper. You're gonna wanna take sandpaper and then the 91% alcohol or denatured alcohol. One of those two, and you're gonna wanna use that sandpaper. I tend to just take it and outside roll it so that the outside is the grit, and then run it down inside of every end of the pole, and then take a paper towel and wet out a paper towel with denatured alcohol or 91% isopropyl, and run it down in that and clean it out. And do that a few times, because that release agent is meant to not accept glue. So we wanna make sure that we clean that out so that you get a good bond. After we've got it all prepped and clean, then we're gonna go through, now we've got our ferrules marked. And what I do is I always tend to dry fit. So, you'll pick up a section and you'll slide that in. And it's a pretty good fit. I mean, if I drop that ferrule, yeah, it'll probably slide in, but there's very, very little room for glue there. And just like with most epoxies, a very, very thin coat is going to be your strongest. So what we're going to do is we dry fit that in. I check every section, to be honest with you. That's just how I am. I want to make sure that I've got everything where it needs to be. So what we do is, you can go about it a couple different ways, but what I recommend doing is getting each end section. So you've got the fork end section and then you have the tip end section, and that's where I start. I start with the end sections and then I glue in the ferrule. So I glue in a ferrule on this end and then I set it aside and I glue in a ferrule on the tip ferrule side, and then those are done. I set those aside to dry. I give it about 2 hours. It's not gonna fully cure out, but what it's gonna do is it'll set up so that when you go to glue the center section onto both of these end sections, as you slide it in, it's not gonna push the ferrule down into the section. So if you try to glue everything up in just one sitting, really, really quick, you actually would force the ferrule down into this pole. So we don't recommend doing that. But what you're gonna also wanna do is as you apply glue to the ferrule, and as you slide it into the section, I always rotate. As you can go back and forth, you can just rotate it one way, and then you're gonna stop it right there where that mark is. So then you've got equal lengths of this ferrule in both sections. So I also make sure that this part right here is cleaned off very, very good, so that when your section slides down and it meets, it's going to meet and create a very, very tight seam. You probably won't even be able to notice it, but if you have glue buildup here, it's not gonna be able to seat all the way down. So make sure, get it seated, let it set up, then take your alcohol and clean it off, and then I set this aside. So it'll look just like that, both end sections, and then I come back and do the foot, the fork, and the point. So same thing, you'll come in, these actually have ridges in it, and the fork actually has glue ridges in it as well. But again, make sure they're cleaned off. I actually take a little sandpaper and I rough that glossy section off there, because you can see that is glossy. This is not really, and it has ridges in it. So that's really, really gonna seat nicely in there. Now, the final part of this, after you've got those sections, the ferrules are glued up, you come back 2 hours later, you're gonna put the center section on, glue that center section. I let that center section set for a little bit. It doesn't need to set as long, but when you come back and you put in your point and your fork, whatever part you glue in last, it's gonna make this pole airtight, and it should be airtight. So it's actually gonna wanna force this section back out, or the fork, it's gonna wanna separate them as this epoxy dries. I always recommend, as you're putting sections together, take and run a piece of tape long ways, maybe a couple on around each side, run a couple pieces long ways, and then wrap to anchor those pieces of tape that you've got. That's gonna keep things from wanting to force themselves apart as the epoxy cures. So just like with anything else, as you're making something airtight here, it's gonna wanna push the fork off or the point off, and you don't want that to happen. Sometimes when I've glued this in my garage, I'll angle it so that the fork is pressed against the door, and maybe I'll take a cooler or something and put some water in it and force it against the ends, and it'll hold everything tight. So again, this is the 21-foot push pole from MHX. Go to mudhole.com and check it out. You can also find it at fishmhx.com. It has all the specifications. These instructions are going to be up. This video will be there. And if you've got any questions, make sure to send us an email, call into Mudhole, send an email about FishMHX, and we'll get any of these questions answered. But again, follow these directions. Be sure that you're putting the point and the fork and the ferrules in the proper sections. They're labeled. It's very easy. And for under $400, you can have a 21-foot carbon fiber push pole that is bad to the bone. So anyway, thanks for watching, and good luck.